All right, boss, we're in. How you doing today?
All good yourself.
Very well, very well. Okay, just a quick note for everyone out there. This is Chris's second time on the podcast. I believe he was number 47. So if you want to learn all about Chris and his background and where he came from and everything like that, go back to that podcast. This is our second podcast. We're just gonna catch up like old friends and talk shop.
Absolutely.
So it's been like a year. I think I saw you last
A
March.
year to date kind
Yeah.
of thing. Yeah, just showing up in town again. I think last year was kind of just nice to be somewhere sunny, positive, catching up with old friends, and I felt like this year was a good time to come and do that again. I then have my partner joining me, my girlfriend, sorry, joining me this weekend, and then sort of showing her around town. But in the meantime, thought I might come and see familiar faces again.
Well, you picked a good time. I mean, you missed the wildfires. Holy shit.
I know it was crazy to us as well, timing wise, because we booked this a year ago, and we kind of went, "Oh my god!" Like she's discovering LA in the worst time
Mhm,
possible, and yeah, I mean, I can't take myself to go and see the Palisades or Altadena.
mhm.
I think that's a bit of a hard watch. I mean, we've seen all the pictures. We know friends who've been close to affected, and who obviously know lots of close friends who are affected. So yeah, it's an interesting time.
Yeah.
But
Some of my podcast guests lost their homes, so that was
yeah,
pretty devastating too. And I've been in touch with them off and on. And so one of them might come back on the podcast and just talk about the whole experience that they had that day. But it was,
yeah,
I had a few firefighters, like retired firefighters on too. And there's a few more people I'm trying to get a hold of. But it's been strange. Like, and even the stuff that happened out in like Palisades and Malibu and
yeah,
and it's still like the PCH, I think, is still blocked in most
yeah. I
areas.
saw on the map it was all pretty shut down.
Hmm.
But yeah, I think it's luckily, hopefully people learn from this, and as much as people say this will happen again, we kind of hope it doesn't. Yeah.
It's funny, just down the street, they're building a new home, and also too, like, when you take Sunset Boulevard out to the 405 when you go west, they're building a few, like, huge homes in Bel Air and stuff like that, and they're building them all with wood. Like unbelievable, because you just saw all these homes go up like matchsticks in the
Yeah.
Palisades, and it's like, why, I guess it's cheaper than using concrete or stone or something like that, but it's incredible, like, how many homes were going up in the middle of these wildfires, and they're
Mhm.
just building them the exact same way as before. I mean, maybe they'll have some different roofing or some different tempered paint or
Yeah.
like fireproof paint or something. I don't know, but it's crazy to see like people just continuing to build in the exact same way.
I think it also just probably depends on how much they can afford, what their situation with insurance companies. I was talking at lunch with someone who there's a filmmaker out there who's had damages due to the fire, but didn't get his house didn't burn down, and the insurance company doesn't really want to cover the damages, and so there's thinking of pursuing the insurance companies, and I assume there's a number of cases like that where people, the insurance companies are tightening their grip and their wallets, and it's a hard time, especially, I mean, for people in Altadena. I assume it's even harder because, a lot of them can't afford to rebuild
Mm,
compared to those in the Palisades. So
sure.
yeah, don't know what look like, but hopefully kind of resolve soon.
It'll be interesting. Like I think, because I know California has blocked one insurance company from increasing their prices, and I think the insurance companies are just going to like not have any fire insurance. Like
Yeah.
they're just going to like strike that off entirely because they've just lost so much money. And then of course, who the hell would want to live in that part of Los Angeles? We're
That's
surrounded.
the thing is, I think, I was also talking to someone else where even if you do rebuild in the Palisades, it's like building in sort of no man's land. It's like a war zone. No, I'd be surprised, and I think the way it's probably going to shape is that someone's going to come buy the plot of land and turn it into a real estate project.
Yep.
Realistically, that's that's the only way to move forward with the Palisades. I mean, of course, it's people who own those plots of land would rather build and resell because they'll lose money
Right.
selling the plot of land versus a home. But again, even if you build, who wants to buy a home amidst rubble? It makes no sense.
So my friend David Buto, he's a well-known photographer here in LA. So he was out there shooting in the days when the fires were actually happening, and he had a very interesting point. Like he was like Pasadena, Pacific Palisades specifically is home to is there's a lot of really old homes there, like
Yeah.
50, 60, 70, 80 years old, all built like with wood and stuff like that. And they had a lot of character, right? And he said like these homes just got completely torched. And he had a similar idea to you. It's like whenever this gets redeveloped, whenever these people start buying up these whole blocks and stuff like that, you're going to see a lot of places like this where I live, like
Mhm.
where it's like townhomes or like no more single family big plots of land
Yeah.
kind of homes. And he was thinking that that's probably definitely going to be the way forward. But also too, like he said, a lot of the newer homes, they made it through the fire no problem, because they had the fire retardant paint and they had tempered roofs
Well,
and
there's
they
that guy in Malibu. I forget, some millionaire who built his house in yacht material, like it was built like a yacht, and it came out unscathed. I don't know if you saw the articles, the
haven't.
pictures. It's just you see the whole coastal line and all these burnt down homes, and there's one home sitting untouched
Yeah.
and unscathed amidst that. And I thought that was interesting. Maybe that there is a lesson to be learnt. I think it's not a gorgeous looking home by any means, but did it do the job?
hmm
Yeah, and so maybe there there is something to be learned from that. So
Well, someone was telling me that if you build a home using wood, it's much cheaper.
mhm.
And if you build a home using like concrete, it can be like up to twice the expense.
Yeah.
So that's
Yeah.
significant.
No, absolutely.
Anyways, I'm glad you're here. So last time we talked about your whole career. We talked about you getting, you're a cinematographer, you're a
Mm.
director of photography, and you were working quite, doing quite a lot of interesting stuff. Like how's the last year been treating you?
I guess it's been a bit of a roller coaster. Obviously, it's been quite exciting with the release of the Turkish feature Kum Zambag, which we discussed on the first episode.
hmm
I got invited by the director to the premiere in Istanbul, which got a really good reception. CNN, I got some compliments on the cinematography by CNN Turkey, a couple of honorable mentions from magazines. And so it was quite a nice touch. It was the first time I got complimented on my cinematography and publicly, and so that was quite fun. And then obviously my first premiere for a project that I shot.
hmm
Um,
What'd you think of Istanbul?
it's an interesting place. For me, Istanbul is a bit like Hong Kong. Oh, sorry, not Hong Kong. Bangkok, where it's a city with a lot of history,
hmm
but it is just jam-packed. The streets with sort of roads and cars and shops and electrical lines and all that. It feels very crammed. And but it's still a very pretty city. I haven't spent enough time in Istanbul. I was there one day before we flew out to shoot the film, and then obviously these 2 3 days during the premiere.
hmm
So I'm yet to properly explore it. I haven't done the Hagia Sophia or any of those sort of prominent monuments.
Yeah. Did you walk around in Taksim Square or anything like that? That's the famous walking street.
You know what's crazy is I did on that day before shooting, because again, before we shot the film in Adana,
hmm
I was flown to Istanbul to discuss with the production, check on the equipment before we flew out. And so I had about half a day to myself, and I was told, go to Taksim Square. And so I went, okay, sure. So I show up and I walk down, and I think a week later, this was when we were shooting in Adana, in the same spot that I was sort of standing and taking pictures, there was a bomb that went off. There was a terrorist attack. And so it's kind of like, oh my God, like, obviously it's a week later, but you still have this feeling of, holy shit, it's like, I could have been there.
Mhm.
I was there. It's like people who, I know this is a really extreme comparison, but, my stepfather, for example, was in the World Trade Center about, I think it was 3 days before, the plane crash, before the towers went down. And it was kind of like, oh my God, I'd have been there 3 days later, who knows?
Yeah.
Um,
Texum's always a hot spot for that kind of stuff because
yeah,
there's so many people there.
well, yeah.
Yeah.
So it's sort of a mixed feelings about that, but no, in general it was fun. Then shot a number of small projects over the last year. It's mostly been sort of short films and music videos. I shot a short film which was really really fun to shoot with a director I work with quite often called Brendan Cleaves. Short film called Angela, about sort of a blind date uh, gone wrong. It's a comedy. It's very British humor, but it's about sort of a guy with buck teeth and a woman with one leg. But they're trying to hide each other's um, sort of uh, problems or their insecurities from each other. And in the end, it's kind of like when it's all revealed, they kind of embrace each other and accept that they both have sort of their differences with imperfections.
Hmm.
And
Did you shoot that whole thing in London?
yeah, we shot it in a pub. It was all pretty much in a pub, and then there was some bathroom scenes, which we shot in a separate restaurant. Then what else did I shoot? I shot a short film with Kevin McNally, which was great fun. Kevin, who was in Parts of the Caribbean, he plays Gibbs in Parts of the Caribbean. I don't know if
Oh,
uh,
the heavy set guy.
the older guy, sort of the right hand man to Johnny Depp throughout the. So he was great to work with. I mean, the director Dean Drinkle, another director I've worked with, who specializes in horror. So this was a horror piece about a guy who's committed a murder and he's trying to get out of it, and he finds a card and calls this number, and it's those cleanup services, but he doesn't know that this cleanup service is the devil,
Hmm.
sort of the devil's agency. And so in exchange for cleaning up his mess, they claim his soul. And obviously it's a sort of horror, so it's all done in a quite uh extreme way. And but that was really really fun to shoot.
What does it feel like as a cinematographer coming into someone else's story? Like, because obviously the director, like there's a director, there's a writer,
Yeah.
and then you're coming into this, this great project, but you don't really have any say on how it's going to go, but you have a huge amount of I guess decision making to do about how it's going to look, right? And what kind of lenses you're going to use and things like that.
Yeah.
So it's just amazing. Like, you have to be super flexible, and your ability to adjust, your idea based on, because these guys have been working on this, even short films, like they
Yeah.
take months to get off the ground.
hmm I'd say it just comes down to trust and having a conversation. I think if filmmaking, especially as a director and DP, it all is about that connection, about the understanding, the communication, and sort of getting to the same level. It's, I guess, the best way to explain it is if in Formula One, coming out of the pit and having to rejoin the race, it's sort of you're coming in and you're having to sort of match the pace and make sure you're on the same level, where you're not trying to impede. You never want to impede as a DP. The director's vision is king. So you're just trying to elevate. And oftentimes directors, unless they've had years of experience, and we're talking some of the major directors, a lot of them have a vision, but it's sort of like 75% there. They kind of have an idea, but they need people to help piece together the final bits that that make it that bring the visual life to it. So whether it's a DP coming in and saying, you know what, I don't know if you thought about this, but instead of it being static, maybe we've gone Steadicam and create more movement, because then it sort of you want the scenes to linger a bit more because of the tone of the story. Or maybe we shoot on anamorphic. So for example, on Devil in the Detail with Dean Drinkle and Kevin McNally, the director wanted it to be from the POV of the main character. So we never saw the main character until he got killed, sort of when reality shifts from what seems to be a horrible nightmare to reality. And that's when we kind of swap around. And for that POV, I said, well, should we go anamorphic, and should we get something that really is so imperfect? So I suggested these Russian anamorphics from the 70s called Lomo roundheads, which, you know, breathe, when lens breathe, it's when the frame sort of increases and decreases when you pull focus. So it's like you'll see on the edge of frame, and heavy breathing is when there's a lot starts to appear and disappear as you change focus, versus little breathing where the frame barely sort of moves. And I wanted something, I thought, well, you'd want to be in the character's shoes, so get a lens that really breathes like crazy, that you, as an audience member, you'd probably go, "Oh, this is weird," but that was kind of the idea, and something that has enormous amounts of distortion and imperfection and softness, and kind of throwing you around visually, where almost as if you were the character and feeling a bit uneasy. And he hadn't thought about that, and he went, "Oh, yeah, this is really interesting. Can you show me some tests?" So I did some tests, and then as well, he wanted, during the film, there's a scene where all of a sudden all the people in the room, in the restaurant, get possessed and start dancing and laughing and tearing their hair out, and sort of tears rolling down, and you kind of, but it snaps into it where you kind of like, is this a sort of hallucination, or is this actually happening? But we wanted to demonize these people in a natural way, not necessarily like doing VFX or anything like that. So I'd seen Dune Part 2 when they did the infrared with Austin Butler's character and all that clan, where they look really pale white with the black eyeballs.
Oh, that's the fighting scene at the beginning. Yeah, that was
Exactly,
amazing. Yeah.
which was really, really cool. And so I started looking into that, because I thought that's kind of an interesting approach. And then I spoke to a few people, and because it meant completely and permanently changing the sensor of the camera, um, I was like, we can't do it. But then I was thinking about it, and I was talking to someone, and they said, well, there is always one option, which is the opposite end of the spectrum, UV. And I was like, "Oh, okay, this is interesting." So, but no one had ever really done tests with UV while shooting. I mean, you see it a lot in photography, but not as much in filmmaking or cinematography. So I went out with my gaffer to a lighting company called GLO, who had these sort of UV tubes, and I tested it, and it was a really, really interesting outcome, where it sort of took the life out of the skin, where it's almost like zombifies the skin, and then makes the white, because UV pops out bright colors like white and yellow and orange. And so obviously it made the skin darker, but it brought the teeth and the white of the eyes out. And so the whole idea was to shoot in the scenes in UV, those sort of crazy demonic scenes in UV, and then in post change the blue to red
Hmm.
to match sort of the whole devilish aspect of the story. And it came out really quite interesting, and it was a bit of a touch the director had not really ever thought about. And that's what you bring as a DP, is you're you're not trying to change the story by any means, but you're like, how can we elevate this scene? And you offer up ideas, a bit like you go fishing, you say, well, there's always this option, this option, this option, until a director goes, actually, I'm interested in this. And sometimes directors will go, you know what, not too keen. And so be it. Oftentimes, there are projects where you just have to kind of roll with it, and the director has a vision, and they don't really want to be too experimental, or they're just happy to shoot and let the story and the actors sort of be king. And yeah, I mean, that's your role. You're just sort of the advisor, visual advisor.
So, I mean, like, so when you get a script for a film
Mm.
and you've been asked to do the cinematography for it, I mean, do you sit down with the director and go scene by scene and be like, what are you thinking here? What are you thinking there? Like, do you just walk through the whole script and try to plan out each scene, or are you doing that on your own?
I It depends. Most of the time, I try and do that. I think for me, the important thing is always having as much material as you can from the get-go, because again, the whole idea that you need to be up to par with the director's vision. You need to see exactly what he's seeing. And so if you can get a script, a storyboard, a shot list, a mood board from the production designer, just have a clear idea, then it helps me as a DP sit with the director, go scene by scene, go through the shot list, be like, this, what are you thinking for this? What are you thinking for this? Or the shot list, I can go, this doesn't work, this could work. Here's a suggestion. Or you just go, yep, I agree with everything.
Mm.
But yeah, because oftentimes, you do need to go through the script bit by bit, because a director, if you're shooting interior scenes and the location is dreadful, where it's, white walls, white curtains, white sofa, whatever, and you then need to work your magic to kind of bring a very plain room to life, where you need a smoke machine to shape light in that space. A director does not think of that.
Mm.
They would, if anything, on the contrary, they kind of go, why do you need a smoke machine? Do you need one? And I'm like, yes, because the location just does not work.
I mean, how often, what's the ideal amount of time you would have to look at a location before you actually had to shoot there? Because like when we make TV, like we're unscripted, right? So we would show up in a restaurant or in a bar not knowing anything about really what we're getting into. And then we would have to like brainstorm for an hour,
Hmm.
over a coffee or a whiskey or something about how we're trying going to make this scene, or how we're going to make this room like pop or
Yeah.
be interesting, and like where I can come in from, where I'm having a conversation, what lights are needed. Like we're doing that sometimes just less than an hour before we actually have to start rolling. Like, well, how many days do you need to plan that kind of
I
stuff?
I think with experience, you end up being able to do it on a shorter time frame. But obviously, if you have the luxury of doing it as soon as possible, weeks in advance, even months in advance, that would be ideal, because then you actually do get to prep. Especially for me, the way I liked scenes is, I go to location, I 3D scan the location on my iPad, with LiDAR scanning. I then turn that into a floor plan. I then light with that floor plan, but then I have the 3D scan where, because if I'm not at the space, I then have access to that space on my iPad, where I can revisit, see where the window is, where this is. And it allows me to sort of take that time to do so. But yeah, for example, a lot of the short films I've done, I've been able to look at locations weeks in advance, where you kind of go, this location works, this location doesn't work, or here's a better alternative. But then I've also, again, the Turkish film, um, I think I discovered the locations for the first time the day before we started shooting, and it was a 3 weeks straight. And half of the locations on that film I only discovered on the day, really.
Yeah. That's
Where
got to be stressful.
Oh, yeah, where, I think in situations like that, for example, if the scene is really important, like there was one scene in the film where it was the female lead, who was having a sort of affair with her ex-husband, in this room at his house, and we didn't get to see that location till the day. And so what we did is we asked to sort of go 1 hour ahead of the team, as annoying as it is for our time, because that's just on our overtime, and it's a request that production may or may not agree to, but it allowed us to get an hour ahead and kind of go, okay, we've got an hour to plan this.
Hmm.
And yeah, again, like you, sometimes I only have about an hour to prep or light a scene, and you kind of have to go with the flow. But that's where experienced DPs come in. You get to read a space quickly, and it's problem solving. You go, right, we don't have time to get too complex with this, but we still need to make it look good.
Hmm.
Let's just smoke it up. Let's kind of get a nice light in. Let's make it romantic, but then add a lot of negative fill on one side to get that nice contrast. Add a few little, very small lights that you can click onto corners and ceilings, or the back of walls to just add a bit more light, and then you just cross your fingers and pray.
Crossing the fingers and praying. I like that.
Um,
Yeah, it's not easy when you get on it, when you get into a location and you just don't have a lot of time to make something, to make magic happen, right? It's just hard.
yeah, but I think there's a fun to it. I think part of the reason a lot of DPs do DP isn't so much for the creative aspect, because I have this conversation all the time, and I think most people in the industry do agree to this, is a DP is about 30% creativity and 70% politics. Because on set, you usually have people you trust. Your gaffer or your head electrician will know a lot more about lighting than you do, and your first AC knows a lot more about the camera than you do. So you kind of have to rely on trusting their knowledge whilst you deal on set with the director, with the scene, with the actors, and maybe with the producer. You're really sort of micromanaging, and there is this adrenaline from being on edge the whole time, problem solving, and kind of having to manage 1,000 things at the same time.
Mhm.
And yeah, I think that's what a DP's role really is at the end of the day.
Such a great adrenaline rush, right?
Oh yeah, I was talking because I was with Shane Hurlbert ASC yesterday at the Filmmakers Academy, and we were kind of talking about the fact that as DPs, there is really two sides to you. There's your normal side, and there is your on-set side,
Mhm.
which is two very, very different characters. I mean, for me, the I feel like a whole different person on set, where I'm just connected. I'm live, and I'm just, you know, my mind is very straightforward. Whereas when I'm sort of relaxed off set in my day-to-day life, sort of you're thinking of anything and everything at the same time. Whereas here, it's like all of a sudden your vision narrows down, and you're just in this commando mode, which brings a whole different side out of you.
So who hires the DOPs? Like, who hires the cinematographers? Is it the director or is it the producers? Like, who kind of introduces you to the project?
Usually it's the director. Most of the time it's a director, because at the end of the day, a director wants to work with a DP that they either like the style of, they get along with, or that, brings something specific to the project. Producers are there to just sort of green light whatever the director says, or say like, listen, no, this DP, I know you want to work with him, but we have a much better alternative. And whether it's for publicity reasons, financial reasons, or whatever. But yeah, there are instances where a producer kind of goes, I know you have this director that you maybe say a director has just come out of school, right? And so they've got this DP that they went to school with, or that they just met out of school, and all of a sudden this director gets a really important project. A producer and a director goes, oh, but there's this guy who probably doesn't have the experience. A producer might go, we've got a guy who, for this project, we'd rather put our trust in that.
Mhm.
And then they'll contact you And then obviously, I just signed with an agent in November. That was another big thing for me this year.
Congratulations.
Thank you very
Okay.
much. Kirsten Beath from Undercranked and in the UK. And yeah, obviously at this stage, a lot of it will go through her, but today she still is pushing me to meet directors. So it's more so finding directors, meeting with them, having a drink, chatting, and hopefully they go, actually, I've got a project coming up. Would you be interested? It's a lot of that. So
It's yeah, man. It's just pressing the flesh, isn't it? It's just getting back out into the world and having lunches and dinners.
hmm I mean, yeah, you just never know. Directors might also just kind of pop out of nowhere, even directors you work with. I mean, I've the Turkish director Mehmet. He again popped out of nowhere a few weeks ago and sent me a script to his next feature.
Hmm.
And that again, it kind of comes out of nowhere. You just get a message or an email months later, having not really spoken, and going, "Hey, we might have something."
Such a random business, isn't it?
Oh, yeah. I mean, again, if you go back to my first episode when I explained the story of how I got the Christmas film,
Hmm.
that was very much 11:30 p.m. That week 3 DPs had dropped out, and 11:30 p.m. I get a call from my friend who was the first AD on this pickup shoot in the UK, and he said, "Do you want to do this?" And then obviously jumped on, and that changed my life. But you just never know. Till then, and if it wasn't for that call, my career would have been very different. But again, it's just you never know when the phone will ring and what it'll be for, and it's a lot of that. I think luck, in a sad way, plays a huge part in film. I think talent is one thing, but the saying, it's not what you know, it's who you know,
Hmm.
and I think comes very true. It's not so much about knowing influential people, just knowing people who are there at the right place at the right time and getting that magic phone call, or magic text, or magic email, or whatever it is, or the magic meeting at a pub. For all you know, you bump into someone whilst ordering a drink, and turns out it's a director or a producer, and you start chatting, and then life changes.
What's that saying? It's like preparedness equals luck, or luck equals preparedness. Like if you're just kind of prepared and ready to go all the time, like,
Yeah.
and you've got a good attitude and you're putting good energy out into the world, like luck will find you sometimes.
Yeah, maybe. It's again for me. A lot of this has been a bit of a surreal experience. I think I'm very, very grateful for where I've come to at my stage in my career, which is extremely unusual by all feats. And I'm fully aware of that. That at 26, having 2 feature films under your belt and a number of projects, and being able to DP at this age is something that's quite a privilege, because most people and a lot of the people we look up to as young filmmakers all went through the ladder. And don't get me wrong, I did my fair share starting at 15, and I was a PA. I was assistant to the director. I did behind the scenes, then third AC, second AC, and then first AC, all before I DP'd. But still, I mean, most of the DPs out there are in their 30s, getting their career started, having AC'd or camera operated or gaffered or sparked for 10 odd years, which I didn't do.
Mhm. It's wild, isn't it? Just how the career progresses.
Yeah,
Yeah. Did you hear Ridley Scott's cinematographer for Gladiator II called him out?
I did. I'm not surprised though. I think I have a bit of a bone to pick with Ridley Scott myself, but I think that's mostly because I'm French, and the way he portrayed French people and Napoleon in his film was just it felt very petty. It was just him having a dig at French people versus being historically accurate, which is kind of if you're doing a historical piece, being historically accurate, at least being 75% accurate with 25% liberty is important. Whereas here, I mean, he was making up battles. He was portraying Napoleon as this sort of autistic man, which Napoleon was far from, and including French people just being, and he admitted to it. He said, French people are pricks, and he kind of wanted to go down that route, which for someone who is that influential, it's kind of disappointing. And I think in general, and you, again, like you said, his DP has a hard time working with him. So, uh, you know, I think a lot of the old school directors are very complicated people to work with. I think, David Lynch was a complicated one. So was Scorsese. A lot of these old school guys, it was a very different time of filmmaking. DPs back then were almost servants to the director. There was no creative collaboration. It's the director's word is king, even on set. And a DP was almost seen as just a camera operator that knew about lighting. And it's only within the last, say, 20 years where DPing changed, the relationship with the director and the DP changed, where it's being taught more as a creative collaboration. And, where the DP has a little more to say and the director is more looking towards DPs a little bit more for advice. And yeah, so I think Ridley is just an old school guy who doesn't really want to hear what anyone else has to say.
I think that's pretty spot on. I went to I went to a screening at the Directors Guild here in, I think it was December, with Ridley, and he was here, and Chris Nolan was here, and he did like a little panel, and we watched the film, and then they talked about it after. And I mean, Ridley Scott's like 84 now, and he wasn't even in the room. Like he's on his, I don't know if he was jet lagged or what was going on, but he was just gone.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, man, like, can you imagine being on set with him for like 2 months doing Gladiator and having him like mumbling and kind of in his own head and not really, communicating effectively. And like, fair enough, the guy's made like 100 fucking amazing movies,
Yeah.
right? And everyone gets old and things like that. But he was not at his best. Yeah.
I think people are enjoying his work less and less, I think, because he's sort of diverted. He's sort of straying away from what he was very good at, which was just sort of strong storytelling. This is more sort of, he, instead of focusing on the story aspect and the writing and he's focusing more on the experience of the film. I think you look at films like Dune. I think that plays a huge part in what films what's happening to these big blockbuster films today is
Well, there's
with
only
IMAX.
blockbusters.
No, exactly. But I think when you look at that, what Dune's done, especially with stuff like IMAX, you look at films like Oppenheimer or Napoleon or Gladiator II, where versus it being about the story, it's about the grandiose experience, the crazy sound, the crazy visuals, the crazy production design, something that they make you want to watch on a IMAX screen and kind of sit there, ignore what the story really is, and just kind of sit and enjoy it as an art piece of sound and visuals, and just sort of taking it in.
Mhm.
And yeah, it's interesting.
I think that's how you have to sell films now, though. Like, I think if you want to get like $100 million or $200 million out of Paramount or Universal or Sony, you
Mm,
have to sell them on the experience. You have to sell them on how to market it, right? And
yeah.
it's just going to be bigger action scenes, bigger explosions, blockbuster style stuff. And I think that's the only way to make a studio movie anymore.
Yeah, I think again, I was having this conversation at lunch, which is, unless you have an IP today, making new sort of sci-fi, even or franchises, creating from scratch is almost impossible.
Yeah.
Today, if you wanted to make a blockbuster, you would have to take an old piece and remake it, or take a video game, or take something that exists and remake it. And it's sad because obviously it feels very limiting, but it's, again, like you said, it's the only way to get funding.
It is too, and it almost feels like the studios and stuff like that, they're using the budget of the film as part of the marketing. Like, oh, we gave Ridley Scott $200 million to make
Mm,
Gladiator 2. And then I was like, holy shit, I got to go see Gladiator. It's $200 million.
yeah.
Like, I want to see how they used all that money to enhance the storytelling, right? But you know, if Ridley Scott came in with Gladiator 2 and it only cost $25 million, he probably wouldn't even have got you know, couldn't have made the movie, right? And
Yeah.
because all anyone wants is bigger, 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 and then with bigger, bigger, bigger comes more financial risk. Like
Yeah, but it's
it's
also because a lot of that budget goes into, like you said, the publicity for the awards. I mean, you look at, for example, Emilia Perez.
oh my god, it's everywhere.
I mean, I don't really know where to start with this because, again, the best way of understanding Emilia Perez, even if you haven't watched the film, which I haven't watched it, but I probably won't take myself to watch it,
I haven't watched it yet.
is you have to just go on Rotten Tomatoes and you see that the critics gave it 75%, and it got 13 nominations at the Oscars despite all the criticism. But the audience on Rotten Tomatoes gave it 30%. That's more than half of the critic rating. I mean, the audiences who are realistic and honest about sort of the film are slating it, and rightly so. I mean, the actors picked, who are meant to be Hispanic, don't sound Hispanic whatsoever. Jacques Audiard goes and makes a critical movie about the cartel in Mexico and sort of the death from cartel in Mexico, without kind of going and checking with these people that it's a story that, they're okay with him telling. A bit like when Coppola had to make The Godfather, he had to go to the mafia, the mafia, and actually kind of go get their blessing. And I'm not saying Audiard needed their blessing, but he kind of, he's not Hispanic, he's French. He knows nothing about Mexico really, and he's portraying the cartel in a very sort of quota-based manner. It's of transgenderism to escape sort of sanction as a cartel leader. I mean, the whole movie does not deserve 13 nominations anywhere, let alone one. Maybe one for, I don't know, the sound design, for all I care. But the only reason it got the most nominations is because I can assure you a huge chunk of that budget went into the publicity and paying it off so that it could, pushing the narrative of the film towards those who are going to vote for it.
That's wild, isn't it?
It's crazy, but again, that's nothing new. I mean, Hollywood's always, and the Oscars have been run like that for centuries. I mean, where it just depends how much money you slip under the table and the gifts you give to all the voters and critics and journalists. You're kind of sweetening the deal.
Yeah,
Um,
and endless events.
exactly.
Yeah.
But yeah, so interesting time.
So what's it like? I mean, what's the UK film market like these days? I mean, is stuff really getting made out there? Because things have been super slow here, and I'm guessing that if things are super slow here, things will be even more slow in the UK.
Yeah, this is the hard thing about the UK at the minute is, you know, over the last couple of years, the reason the UK has been doing so much work and such huge projects like Game of Thrones, like Star Wars, like Vikings, I mean, some huge, huge franchises, is because pretty much all of the projects being shot in the UK were financed by the US market and the US productions and the US American studios, when the UK ended up creating this tax rebate for these productions. And so the incentive opened the floodgates to Americans to move to the UK and just invest. As Hollywood was slowly dying, it was like the next best solution is the UK. Save money, spend money, and get access to a number of huge studios that were pre-built and a large sort of workforce. The problem is the UK ended up sort of a bit like a kid in a candy store went, oh, this is brilliant. And all of a sudden, the attention was being brought to the UK market, and the projects were getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And actors in the UK were getting more attention. Filmmakers were getting more attention. It was this great big revolution for the UK. But it kind of blindsided them to the fact that the more they relied on American money, the more they were tying themselves to the US industry. And so when the strike hit in 23 in the States with the SAG and the writers, um, the US stopped working. And so naturally, the UK stopped working because the money stopped coming in. It was like just an abrupt, wall that stopped all of that funding, and that left the UK kind of hanging with no safety nets that had been built. The government did not prepare for this. They kind of were happy that the money was flowing in without thinking of how to cover their backs in case something were to happen. And it just came and bit us all in the ass and just, you know, and the worst bit is, during COVID, the industry in the UK was the only industry allowed to work. So, the film industry was injecting a lot of money into the UK economy during COVID, because we couldn't work from home. So we were quite an important piece to the government, economically. Whereas when the strikes hit, instead of protecting this one sort of important, piece to their economy, Rishi Sunak just went, let them retrain, go and retrain, as if we were dispensable.
Hmm.
And this is whilst 75% of the film industry at that time was out of work.
That's incredible.
The number is huge, with a third of those dropping out of the industry altogether, people selling homes. It was total and utter chaos, worse than COVID by any means. And I think it really causes a bit of a question towards the UK film industry, towards the organizations that protect the industry, and above all, the government kind of going, instead, even today, it's been almost a year, 2 years. Actually, it's a year and a half since the strikes ended. And still today, the only response the UK government has created to this problem is that they've increased the tax rebate for American productions to try and incentivize them to come back and reinvest.
I think everyone thinks like everything that's made in the UK is created in the US. Like, I'm just wondering, so you live there, you understand the marketplace a little bit better. So obviously you have big productions coming from the US over to the UK to take advantage of the scenery, the locations, the tax rebates, et cetera, et cetera. But how much of the UK film industry is making their own movies, and how much of the UK film industry is just people coming from outside, like the Americans coming in and taking advantage of all those tax credits? What do you think the percentage is there?
Oh, I think it's quite a dramatic split. Even
It's not 50-50.
Oh, by no chance. I think if anything, you'd be lucky if 20% of the industry in the UK was by this is one thing, fully funded by a British company, whether it's BBC, Sky, and even when those productions take place by BBC, Sky, Channel 4, even Eon Productions, who do James Bond, it's always, always, always a co-production with an American super company or
Mhm.
super production. So, you look, even if it's not an American production, like for example, there's a show that just came out called Mussolini, Son of a Century, which is brilliant, really, really great show.
I haven't even heard of that.
It's a dramatized piece about Mussolini's rise to power
Ooh.
prior to the war. It doesn't sort of show, it's more the rise of fascism and his rise to, uh, and it ends on sort of him installing a dictatorship and ending democracy in Italy.
Is it a feature film or a television
It's
series?
a TV
Oh,
series
brilliant.
produced by Sky, British, but it's also produced by the Cinecittà, which is the big organization in Italy.
Mhm.
So it's a co-production. Uh, Naturally, obviously, because it's an Italian piece, but still, the UK barely does anything. You look at, for example, a show called SAS Rogue Heroes, which is produced by the BBC.
Oh, you showed me that trailer last time you were here.
Very, very good show. I mean, season 1 was better than 2, but still, I think that show, again, I think it's HBO that co-produce it. Same with Gangs of London. That's a Sky and HBO piece. It's very hard today because you just don't see, well, a lot of companies like the BBC is obviously governmentally funded, and the government doesn't want to spend billions of dollars on making films. So they,
Even USAID funded. Did you see that news that came out?
Mhm. Exactly.
Yeah.
And again, you look at somewhere like France. I can't vouch for France either per se. I left the country mostly because I wasn't the craziest fan of the industry in France at the minute, on the narrative front. But what France has done really well is it has, these sort of safety nets to protect the French filmmakers and artists, which is called l'intermittence du spectacle, which they have some for theater, for film, for music, which consists of a program where obviously when you're intermittent, you can't get a full-time contract. So it's one or the other. Either you're full-time contracted or you're an intermittent. You can't do both. And what the intermittence allows is you have to work X amount of hours per year. And then the following year, you're covered by the government for every day you don't work on a minimum wage.
Oh, wow.
So it's huge. It kind of keeps artists afloat. And in the situation, say like the UK, where all of a sudden, I don't know, the industry shuts down for a year, you kind of feel slightly protected by the government. Whereas UK, again, what their response is, well, there's no money. Let's just open the gap to allow more money. But if there's no money coming in, it doesn't matter how big that gap is, how high that tax incentive is. It's not creating an emotion. What you need is to push for investors. You need to be a bit more strict on these productions and production companies. I think I was talking to the guys at the Filmmaker Academy yesterday, and one of the solutions which we were talking about was maybe instead, especially for the US, for example, a lot, obviously these tax incentives across Europe and the UK, even in Hungary or Turkey or wherever American productions are now filming, it's taken a lot of work away from the American filmmakers who are based here.
Mhm.
So maybe instead of these tax rebates, these organizations and in the US should be taxing productions, American productions shooting abroad, and then uh, sort of showcasing it in the US. So if you're shooting a commercial in the UK with UK crew and then sort of showing it at the Super Bowl, you know, I think these companies should be taxed instead and sort of try and incentivize them to retract and come back here. And I think the UK should do a bit of the same, where instead, you are pushing these companies to kind of get their shit together
Yeah.
and start investing in their people, their crews, versus bringing people in or bringing productions in, because the Brits know how to make great films and great TV series. Again, you look at everything that's being made at the minute, a good chunk of the biggest shows and movies are out of the UK by British filmmakers. but it just seems to be the case that we're only focusing and tying ourselves to American money with nothing underneath it to protect you in case it all goes.
which we just went through 4 years of.
Yeah, exactly.
I was in the UAE. I mean, they didn't do anything for filmmakers or artists in the UAE, like,
Mm,
because you don't pay any tax in the UAE, and so they don't really have to help you out at all. So
yeah,
like, it's amazing how many like photographers or camera operators that do news, because it's kind of like a hub. Like, they can get to Turkey, they can get to Israel, Palestine, they can get to Afghanistan. Like, they can get to hotspots all around the world if they're covering news. And they were just sitting on their hands for like years because everything just kind of stopped because they weren't even able to travel.
yeah.
Yeah.
No, I don't really know. Again, I'm too young probably to know the ins and outs of, and the exact details of what's happening behind the scenes to help the situation. But I think what I do know is, nothing is being done in the immediate. And we're still in a situation where 68% of the industry in the UK is out of work.
Mhm.
A lot of young people who are, there's a change of the guards today in the industry where, a lot of the older generation filmmakers are slowly bowing out, and so you have all these young filmmakers that kind of need to come in and fill the boots. But if all of them can't afford to be in the industry, because when you start out, you're making little to no money, you're having to do a second job, and it's a very nomadic world. Um, it's a sacrifice, and if no one's there to sort of help you sort of stay afloat, it's very hard mentally. I mean, no wonder today you have so many mental health organizations helping filmmakers today. I mean, it's crazy. You didn't have that 3 years ago because we didn't need it, but now more than ever, people just don't know how to navigate the situation, and there's no clear showcase by the government or direction as to where we might even be in 2 years. I mean, for me, again, I'm about to take 2 years off to go back and learn and meet new people in school and sort of learn a thing or two whilst the industry heals. Um, and giving it 2 years to kind of find its footing again. But it's a gamble. For all I know, in 2 years, we might still be in the same situation. I think,
Could be worse.
could be worse. Last year when the strikes ended, I was speaking to some of the guys in the industry who'd been there forever, like Shane Hurlbur, as well as other major directors and producers, and they were all adamant. From experience, March 2024 was gonna be when the industry was gonna come back, and it didn't.
Mhm.
On the contrary, it went completely the opposite direction. It just crashed even more. And some major directors had to sell their homes. Some had to leave the industry. Some got dropped by their agent despite having 20, 30 features under their belt. Um, and I think what's happened is 2024 was a clear indication that no one really knew what to do. It's kind of like limbo for everyone, even those with the money, those with the experience. Everyone didn't really know how to proceed. And especially because I think a lot of funding was frozen and a lot of investments weren't being repaid, so there was a lot of debt being created. There was all sorts of just catastrophic effects. And 2025 isn't showing necessarily any movement so far. I know it's early, but no one has spoken about what to expect for 2025. So I've pretty much said to all my people, I said, honestly, I would expect nothing until mid to late 2026. I think this year is going to be another very, very quiet year whilst companies and organizations and kind of come together and start thinking of a solution, and then sort of early 2026, maybe start implementing those solutions. But until someone comes up with a plan and voices it, there's nothing happening.
Well, it's interesting because you have a really great perspective on this. So from me, the way I see it is, like the studios really are struggling, right? And obviously the television companies that all these studios own, they're really struggling also. And it's interesting that the way that they're trying to break out of their struggling is by doing more blockbusters, right?
Yeah.
So instead of doing 10 films at $20 million each, they're doing one film for $200 million. But of course, when you do one film for $200 million, you use way less people. So I'm seeing it more as kind of this democratic, like this field of filmmakers that's out there, like are just not being used
Mm.
because all the budgets are going into one production for Denis Villeneuve or Christopher Nolan or Ridley Scott. These are the guys who are able to greenlight $200 million projects.
Yeah.
But but what I think the industry really needs is grassroots filmmaking again, or people working on smaller budgets. And by small, I mean like a $10 million budget, which is fucking huge. $10 million is a massive amount of money. But what we need to do is start making films for these players.
Yeah.
And because I've been sitting here for the last 15 months talking to people in the industry,
Yeah.
and it's been fucking depressing.
Oh, of course. I mean, it's funny. We were joking about this the other week because there was an expo in London, which is the big sort of film expo called the BSC Expo in London, where every DP and everyone in camera and lighting and grip kind of show up to this event to see the latest tech. But I mean, you will never go to an event and meet so many people that because you're literally, as all of the UK industry kind of shows up to this one event, you're doing 10 steps, seeing someone and then 10 steps in another. And you're constantly in conversation. I remember like one of the days I was meant to leave at 2, and I was walking from one side of the building to the other to exit. And I think by the time I started leaving, it was 2 o'clock. By the time I walked out the building, it was 3:30 because I'd been stuck in like a dozen conversations in the process of leaving. But the joke has been like, the conversation is just going to be the same with everyone. Hey, been a long time. How's life? How's work? It's shit. Okay, same here. And the next one, it's just the same thing on repeat. Everyone's like, and I think there is a gap where you either have DPs in terms of those who are working today. It's either those who are really, really well established, who are getting called up for gigs, for commercials, because again, agencies can trust their experience and their CV. Then there's those who are the young guys taking the non-paid to scrap paid gigs on their DSLRs and just going out there to shoot but not getting anything out of it, and everything in between, those with experience and sort of just breaking through, being sort of mid-20s to sort of mid to late 30s, that group doing little to no work at the minute.
Mm.
And that portion there alone, from the mid-20s to sort of mid to late 40s, is a huge chunk of the cinematography world in the UK.
Mhm.
And obviously you can try and step down and do like AC again or camera operate or lighting. But again, like you said, if there were more projects, you might be able to. But if there's no work, or there's no pay, it's a tough pill to swallow, a tough decision to make,
Yeah, you're right. And so let's get into this a little bit. So you're taking 2 years off.
Mhm.
You're 26 years old, and you're taking 2 years off now to go to school. So walk me through this decision and where are you going to go to school? What are you studying? Like, what's the whole thing? Where's this idea coming from?
I think again, last year, as I said, was a roller coaster. I had lots of great moments, but then also it was a lot of very quiet moments which were a bit stressful. A lot of small projects and nothing that was really, carried its fruits. And so for me, going into this year, I sort of ended 2024 and just went, there's no way, no way, no way, no way. I'm doing another year after 2 years already of sitting around waiting for the phone to ring and sort of taking small projects that, may or may not lead to anything. So I kind of went until the industry needs time. And until then, what's one way of kind of stepping away whilst also gaining something from stepping away? And I think going back to school was the right time, learning a few more tips and tricks as a cinematographer. Because again, I'm still a very young cinematographer. I still have a lot to learn that I didn't get to learn the first time round, such as shooting on analog, shooting studio style films, Hollywood style and sound stages and learning to light that way. Um, all huge parts to know as a DP. I mean, these are sort of really important things to know if you're ever going to be a big DP. And on my own time is very hard to do. You can't just shoot something on a sound stage for the sake of it, or shoot 35 mil film in your on your own budget. I mean, it's highly expensive. So I thought, let's step away. Let's learn these new sort of things that I can add to my repertoire, uh, and then sort of come back a bit stronger. So obviously there's two schools which are the best to do these sort of things, and are the two most reputable cinematography schools, I'd say, in the industry, which are the AFI here in LA, American Film Institute, and then the National Film and Television School in the UK.
Mm.
And yeah, we'll see what happens with those. We'll be able to update you in a few weeks or a few months' time.
That's interesting, because I wrote a few recommendation letters for some people to get into AFI for
Oh,
this year. Yeah, so I think the acceptance or rejection letters come out in like April, maybe.
mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, no. So AFI, you hear back in on the March 14th.
Okay, that's it.
So, but I've had my interview with them, which went really well. I don't want to jump the gun, obviously, but that could be quite exciting.
Well, for you coming from the UK
Mhm.
and you're wanting to know more people in LA and you're wanting to network in LA. So the great thing about AFI, and this is not an advertisement, but
Mhm.
I've literally had professors at AFI sit and
Yeah.
tell me about this. Like the great thing about AFI is all the professors are still working. So they're doing, part-time gigs with AFI, and then they're still in the industry
Yeah.
making films and stuff like that. So you're actually being taught by people who are actually making stuff,
Of
doing
course.
stuff, which is incredible.
I mean, there's a reason those two schools are sort of the holy grails in that sector of sort of post grad filmmaking. I think they're well recognized for the people that come out, the kind of importance they put on the process of filmmaking and attention to detail. And they only take the very best. I think AFI's acceptance rate is 1%, and so is NFTS, who have a very complicated process to get in as well, especially for cinematography. But then again, NFTS, the reason it's got such a huge program is it's where Roger Deakins graduated from, and so he today pretty much runs the program and reinvests in the program, and so has made sure that it's sort of this very high level cinematography program, and yeah, I think for me, LA, the reason I kind of went for both of those schools as well is obviously NFTS, great program, run by one of the most legendary DPs out there. And then I think as well, AFI in LA, during my last visit, I kind of had a bit of a revelation, which is, the UK is a very depressing place. I think,
Let's be honest.
let's be honest, British people are not happy people. And I think it's just a cultural thing. No one really wants to hear what you've got to say. No one's got a positive attitude on anything.
Can we blame it on the weather?
We can definitely blame it on the weather as well. I think the mix of politics, poor food. British food is not a very known category of the culinary world, and yeah, then the weather obviously just does not help.
Mm.
And so when I came here last year, it was quite an overwhelming opposite, where people were really positive, whether it was genuine or not. I didn't really care. For once, people wanted to hear what I had to say, wanted to know what projects I had, and that mixed with the sunny weather kind of made for a nice combo, and it kind of got me thinking, maybe if I'm going to take 2 years away, there are worse places to be.
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, and also too, like I feel like the conversations that are being had here are definitely better than anywhere else in the world. Because even if Denis Villeneuve is going to go film in Hungary and Abu Dhabi for a year and a half to make
Mhm.
Dune, all the big conversations about who's in, who's out, and all the casting is done here too, right? So
Oh yeah, no, I mean, the conversation I have with my stepdad all the time is that decisions are made here.
mm,
Whether the productions are shot abroad, decisions are made in America. It's made in LA. Even if the LA scene has been dying on a steep decline over the last couple of years, with a mass exodus of producers and production companies, whether it's to different parts of the states or to different countries, the decisions still remain here.
mhm.
And so I think LA still holds that position of power, where, if you can be close to those decision makers, it's a good place to be.
Mm, agreed. Absolutely. And it's fucking sunny almost every day.
I was to say, coming from 3 degrees weather in London to 26 is brilliant.
It's interesting though. We just had like a couple, like last week we had some bad rains on Wednesday and Thursday, and you should have seen like the videos of what happened in the Palisades, because obviously there's no homes there anymore,
Right.
and all the runoff came down off the mountains, the
Yeah, you
coastal
guys have
mountains.
mudslides now, don't you?
So
It's
fucking
you guys are having it great at the minute, so
it's been a wild start to the year, that's for
yeah.
sure. Yeah.
And then on top of that, you then have people like Mel Gibson and Sylvester Stallone being named as the saviors of the industry by Trump.
Oh, are they?
Yeah, didn't you see?
I haven't seen that
Trump
yet.
nominated Mel Gibson, who's blacklisted by the industry. Sylvester Stallone, who, other than acting in action films, doesn't really know how to handle an industry,
Mm.
the film industry.
Well, he's doing what, King of Tulsa on Paramount Plus.
Okay, and I mean, King of Tulsa, Expendables. I mean, nothing that's even made it close to the Academy or the Emmys. It's except for maybe Rocky back in the day. Um, and then there's another guy. I forget his name, but it kind of is ironic that the industry is being put in the hands of people who aren't even respected in this field.
It's interesting. It's funny that that came out the way that did, because I actually haven't heard that, but it's pretty common for like Trump to pick two, people who are, on the edges of whatever's going on to
Yeah.
to somehow lead it, right? Because obviously, people who really know how this city works, actually they're not even American. Like they're Chris Nolan and Denis Villeneuve. Those are the guys making all the big movies now.
Hmm.
And Denis Villeneuve, I think, is Canadian, and Chris Nolan's British.
Yeah. It's crazy.
Yeah.
But I really don't know. I'm hoping that someone comes up with a good idea. That's all I'm hoping for. So that by the time I'm out of school, I can actually come back into an industry
Hmm.
and start making a difference again. But
It's interesting. Do you remember? You might not. I mean, you would have been a baby, but in 2019,
right.
everyone was super excited, especially in the film and television industry, because they were expecting like the 2020s, the 2020s to be like the 1920s, like the
Yeah.
roaring 20s, where the economy was gonna, go crazy, and we were gonna be back, and Hollywood was gonna like make a comeback. This was gonna be like Hollywood's decade, right? And then
Mhm.
then you've got COVID, then you've got strikes, then you've got wildfires, and it's just been like
Completely the opposite. Like split opposite. I mean, yeah.
it's insane. It's
It,
and to be creative, and like think of it like you said it perfectly. Like if you went to film school in 2018 or 2019 and then you entered the industry in late 2019 or early 2020, you've already been kicked out of the industry. Like you're not.
oh yeah. I do feel bad, and for people who've just come after me. I mean, I have people contacting me all the time, students kind of going, "Hey, like, loved your career. Like, what tips do you have? How can I get to where you are?" And really, if I was in their shoes, I don't really know what I would do.
Mm.
It's a very confusing time. I'd say, you know, m- the realistic answer is hold on.
Hold on
Like,
tight.
hold on tight, stick, try and, if you drop out, then you drop out. But if you manage to stay long enough, maybe there's a chance.
Mm.
But it's a lot of no guarantees. I today alone, even as someone who has now shot a number of projects and who's starting to sort of make a name for himself, I don't know where I kind of go from here. I mean, yes, I've got an agent, but it hasn't necessarily sort of brought anything yet. I've obviously I had feature films that got cancelled due to the strikes and some that lost funding altogether. I've now got two possible feature films that I've been sent the script of to be hopefully shot in the next year or two. But yeah,
What happens if you get into AFI and then someone gives you like a 2-month shoot in Turkey or Italy?
well, I'd say because there is a 3-month summer period between the first and second year where they do expect you to go out and work. So I'd be hoping to be able to shoot something in that window of time. But yeah, AFI is a full-time thing, and they kind of expect 100% commitment. So, obviously it's a sacrifice, it's a gamble, but at least it's a sacrifice and a gamble that, comes at a good cost. You do come out with a great amount of knowledge, some really fantastic people, and then you kind of get recognized as an alumni of some of these really honorable schools.
Yeah. I had a young writer sitting across from me, on the podcast. Actually, her podcast I think is coming out next week. It was maybe a week or two ago, and she was just saying she's a student at AFI, so I wanted to chat with her. And she's a young writer, and she's just like, man, it's 8 a.m. till midnight, like every day. Like it's because you end up collaborating with a lot of your students too, right? So she's a student, but she's also actively writing and pitching screenplays and working on scripts. So she goes to school Monday to Friday, and then she has two writing partners that she works with on the weekends. So who are also students at AFI.
Yeah.
So she's going to school all week, and then on the weekends she's with the same people basically, also working and writing scripts. So I just it is like a full on.
Oh yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, even I think the first semester between the time you start and your first break being the Christmas break is 14 weeks straight. There's not a single break anywhere other than your weekends, and even then. So it really is full on. But at the same time, because I've had a very quiet 2 years with just small projects, I guess I kind of said in my interview to AFI that, on the contrary, I was really excited to be full on and be busy because
Yeah.
I feel like I've almost forgotten what that feels like, and it's,
I miss the adrenaline.
yeah.
Just being on set, being in a place, having to make decisions, having to make things happen. That's, I think, the bit I miss the most.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I think it's why a lot of people today are willing to take low to no paid projects because, it's just that feeling of being on set is something that you can't be away from too long when you've had a taste of it. For me, especially feature films, I mean, it's obviously very different beast, um, because it holds a lot more weight and there's a lot more parts to it. There's a lot more you can do as a cinematographer where you get to be a bit more involved in the project. I think for me, like a feature film, for example, I'm more connected to it than, say, a TV series or a short film or commercial. Because when you're only shooting for a day or two, you don't have enough time to sort of settle into the story physically.
Mhm.
Whereas on a feature, after a week, you're kind of starting to connect, almost like you're becoming one with the story, and you start becoming a lot more personal with it. And I think that's the beauty for me about feature films and why I love them so much is I kind of feel more connected to them. Um, but yeah,
Yeah. It's gonna be strange if you're in school for 2 years and then you come out and we're still in this place.
I really, really hope it's not the case. But I think, look, the pendulum will swing. I think, like anything, it's gone to that extreme of nothing, and something's gonna cause it to come back because the film industry is everything in today's world where people need to consume stories, and with streaming and I think cinema is a huge part of our culture. And I'd be very surprised, and I can't believe that anyone would let that die. It's like if you let music disappear, you can't. It doesn't exist. Storytelling will always remain, and so someone's going to come in and sort of save the day, hopefully, or in multiple parts and steps. And who it will be, when it will be, where it will be, I don't know. I think, however, international cinema is definitely enjoying a rise out of the situation happening in the West. I think Korea is having a great time at the minute, and I think Netflix are investing more in Korea now because that industry is self-sufficient,
Mhm.
just with a bit of cash flow by Netflix in there, and they can do their own stuff, and it sells really well. Same in places like Italy or the Nordic countries are doing a lot of their own work. And I think places like actually Turkey is an interesting place that and I don't say this because I shot in Turkey, but obviously having worked there, I now follow a lot of people that are based there, whether it's actors, directors, camera people that I've worked with, and the Turkish industry's been full on. I mean, they are doing massive, massive TV series on their own cash, and I think the reason being is Turkey kind of left the door open to Russia when they attacked Ukraine, and the world shut off Russia. Turkey were still kind of like, what, they're, I think, political allies with Russia. So for them, they were fine with Russian investment, Russian money, and then the Russians were allowed to travel to Turkey.
Mhm.
And what that's allowed in a way is because the Russians couldn't invest in anything abroad, but they could invest in Turkey. So I think Turkey's taken advantage of that situation, and it's boomed their industry beyond any time in their history. I think this is the biggest the Turkish industry has gotten, and it's probably going to get bigger and bigger because they have a number of incredible locations to shoot in.
Now that's the real key, isn't it? I mean, just the diversity of the physical landscape of Turkey is spectacular.
Exactly. And then everything's very cheap,
Mhm.
but so they really can afford to shoot very large projects. And again, a lot of this, the reason people aren't thinking of Turkey is because it's not being invested by Netflix or any of these major American corporations, and thus not being streamed across to the West. But the production companies in Turkey are completely fine. They've been sort of, from what I see, obviously I don't want to speak for the Turkish film industry, but from what I see, they've really been sort of getting things done, and killing it.
Well, they've got a long history of making, like, television shows and films, like, and also too, during COVID, Turkey stayed open,
Yeah.
and I remember Guy Ritchie was filming, a film with, Hugh Grant in Turkey during COVID, because they had I can't remember which movie it was actually. Oh, it was the one where Hugh Grant no, which one was it? I don't know. Can't remember. He's done so many movies with fucking Hugh Grant. But, yeah, but they were filming, during COVID there just because it was open, and
Yeah.
they had great locations and things like that, so it was just easy.
Hmm.
Mm.
Yeah. Yeah. I think Turkey is a place to kind of look at and keep an eye on. Because again, like you said, Turkey did have an industry for a long time, but they were always known for like the TV dramas, like the novellas a bit.
Yeah.
Whereas now the shift is taking, the projects that they're doing are a lot of timepieces, like period pieces, which are harder and more expensive to make, but
Mm.
they're still doing it. And on large scales with big crews and, you know, a lot of equipment. And yeah, it's a really interesting sort of development there.
Yeah.
So
Let's hope they keep pumping. Because yeah, I think with the US suffering so much, we really have to rely on other parts of the world if we wanna get back to work again, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
um, it's a bit of a catch-22 then at the same time. It's like investing in other industries where things are happening, but then at the same time, you're then losing out on your local crews, and it's a tough one. I think again, you should be like you said, instead of $100 million film, really being able to do 10 films for a much smaller budget and sort of throwing it all over the place, getting the ball rolling internationally, getting those networks up and running again is huge.
I would love to see I would love to see a new studio enter the game
Hmm.
with massive backing, and they only make $10 million movies.
Well, that's A22, isn't it? Oh,
Mhm.
A24.
Well, yeah, I mean, a few bigger ones, like in Lionsgate 2 make a few bigger ones, but yeah, I mean, it would be nice to, like, see a studio, like a new studio
Yeah.
backed by some billionaire come out and just with a mandate, and we're like, "Budgets have gotten crazy, you know, movies aren't just events, they're stories to be told,
Hmm.
and we're gonna take, for every $200 million Dune movie that comes out, we're gonna make 20, beautifully crafted, stories to
Yeah.
tell." And I would love to see that happen and just bring some reality back to the space.
No, absolutely, you're right. I think it would be interesting to see someone sort of take that step, but I guess at the same time, everyone's sort of left in that tricky position where people will only really go to the cinema to see stories they know, actors they know, and so the budgets are affected. So I think a lot of actors and filmmakers in higher positions do need to take a little bit more of a sacrifice
Mhm.
where they accept that independent cinema and smaller stories need to happen,
Yeah.
and sort of being able to offer that sector, bring it to life and turn the attention of viewers to independent movies. But I think everyone just needs to be game,
I
and
think
that's the
so.
hardest bit.
Yeah, and I think and too, like, a lot of A-list actors, like, they wanna sink their teeth into something different. Like
Mhm.
they want to do low budget movies. They want to do, you know, really with really strong stories. Like they've done the blockbusters. Like they're kind of over it. And
Yeah.
I think also too, like you'll get a lot of really great A-list actors working for a lot less if they know that they can work more. Like actors nowadays, I mean, sure, I guess their compensation is also based a little bit on what the movie will do. And if you make a $200 million movie and then you also spend $200 million marketing it, you know, that's great for the movie and actors make a lot of money. But they're only really getting paid so much because they're doing so little.
Yeah.
Like whatever happened to the days where like an actor would actually make 3 or 4 movies in a year? Like those days are gone.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
It's crazy. Um,
Now you make like $10 million on one movie, but you film it for 3 months overseas, and then you don't do anything for 12 months until you have to market it, and marketing it takes longer than it takes to make the movie. Like it's insane. Like actors are actually being paid in Hollywood in some cases more or equal to the amount of money that they made to actually act to do marketing on the movie because they have to market it for 2 months
mhm.
before the movie even comes out, even if it only took 30 days to shoot.
Yeah. Yeah, and also you see a lot of them sort of turning to like producing and directing and writing,
Mhm.
more so today than ever. You know, even Jesse Eisenberg, who did his latest film with
Kieran Culkin. Mhm.
exactly. You've got Ben Stiller, who's doing writing and producing
Severance.
Severance,
Yeah.
which is freaking brilliant show.
Mhm.
You've got Matt Damon, who's now got his production company, and he sort of produces a lot. I mean, it's yeah, you're seeing very sort of left field and diagonal moves by actors to kind of keep up with the fact that they're now doing a lot less work.
Yeah, I think it's just boredom. Like I think people just want to be creative. Being creative feels amazing, right?
Oh yeah,
And if you can only be creative for 1 month or 2 months a year, it's like what the hell are you going to do with the rest of your time?
exactly. No, you're right.
Start a podcast.
Exactly.
Oh man, so you got any? I mean, what can we expect from you over the next couple months? Are you working on anything specifically other than like you know moving back into the education field for a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, there's discussions. I think one of the interesting things that might be happening is again one of the directors, Brendan, who I did Angela with the short film last year. He's been in sort of talks with some of the guys who run the Hertfordshire Film Fund, which is a region just outside of London, where a lot of the studios, the newer studios, are being built. And these are guys who are trying to bring life to the Hertfordshire film scene, and so asking people to come and shoot in these studios. So there's talks of maybe some short films to be shot there and some of the sound stages. Scripts are, you know, to be confirmed, and I think right now is just sort of when I get back, sit with my agent and sort of discuss what the best course of action is. I mean, I've met a number of directors of the last year. I've been sort of pushed by my agent to sort of push meetings and actively look for directors, where she's asked me to look at magazines, look at websites, look on Instagram, look at anything that's being shot that I like the look of, contact the director and, you know, invite them out for a drink kind of thing and get the discussion going, get the meeting going. And so yeah, hopefully more of that until something bites. And you never know. Again, waiting for that phone to ring.
That's the thing, isn't it? Like most people just can't handle that uncertainty.
I mean, I'm also, again, I think a lot like the actors who are bored and going into something else. I've also sort of been developing two projects, which are gathering quite a bit of interest and traction. One is a TV series about motor racing, sort of inspired by my grandfather. Um, and then the second one on a singer called Cesária Évora, who was a Cape Verdean singer, very famous for a song. She did a song called Besame Mucho, which I think a lot of people would know if they heard. And she was uh, my father's favorite singer. So it's sort of an ode to him, as well as my partner being from Cape Verde. So it was quite a coincidence. And I think Cesária Évora was the first African artist to win a Grammy.
Oh, wow.
So she was really quite a special artist, and no movie's really been done. So I'm kind of pushing into that narrative. I was in Cape Verde in September and spoke to my partner's uncle, who used to work in government there, and he's we're trying to get the discussion going, and ideally make it a co-production with the States, because I think this is a story that needs to happen, that needs to be done by an American company, because Cesaria is a name that that people know the music, they don't know the person. And the only way to really get people to go and discover Cesária Évora is if you do it in a way where with actors that are recognizable in a language that people kind of uh, can watch from around the world. I think it'll keep a lot of its authenticity,
Hmm.
because also you've got the largest community of Cape Verdeans outside the country is in Boston.
Oh, really?
So the great thing is I can still make it an Americanized story while still staying close, true to the roots, working with a lot of the Cape Verdeans here in the States, and who speak, Portuguese Creole, and who, uh, you know, understand the story of Cesaria. So that's been another sort of interesting project that I've been developing. Yeah, again, kind of keeping myself busy, always getting the creative ideas out onto the paper. I think as a filmmaker, whether you're a DP, a director, or like you're a sound engineer, you're always craving sort of creativity and being creative. And I think it's always important to keep that creativity going, whether it's shooting something on your own for little to no money and doing something that you're passionate about, that you kind of express yourself, or even just developing stuff, coming up with stories, and you just never know if when it'll happen, who might be interested. And so, yeah.
Mm. Got to keep it busy, man. You got it.
Absolutely.
Yeah. There's nothing worse than idle time.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Um,
Okay. Well, yeah, man. Thanks for swinging by again and picking this up.
thanks for having me.
Hmm.
You never know, maybe next year, another one.
Why not? I would really love to, if you do get into AFI and or if you're back working, if you have a busy summer and you come back, it would be great to catch up with you again, because like it's really interesting to figure out what's going on in this industry, and it's great to have these people like yourself who are young and coming up, and then also people who are more senior, and getting this kind of landscape of just what's going on. And I think it's super valuable for the audience, and it's always great to catch up with a friend. So I'm super, super glad you came by, and I wish you all the best of luck with the March 14th response times, and let's see where you end up in September.
Absolutely. Well, I'll let you know.
Yeah.
But thanks again, and yeah, we'll chat more in a year's time.
Or before. Or you just go up here, show everyone we're in the same room. Great to see you again, Chris, and enjoy the rest of your stay in LA.
And yeah, take care of yourself.
Will do.
Cheers.
And we're out.